Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals public hearing for October 17, 2017. Go.
Okay, good morning, and I'm very pleased, proud to announce the arrival for the first review session of our newest commissioner, Dr. Nazar Sheta, who is an engineer, and we've been missing an engineer, as you know, for a couple of months. I'm sure that Dr. Sheta will contribute enormously to the discussions at the board and, of course, the analysis of the projects where engineering issues are the subject. So, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. Morning.
Okay, we'll begin with a special order calendar. Continued hearing items. Item number 1, 7-57BZ, 2317 Ralph Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. I think we had some questions at the last hearing that I didn't see answered in the latest submission. We had said that the fence slatting needed to be replaced, extraneous signage removed, including the coffee cup. Sounds funny to those listening, it was quite a large coffee cup. That the graffiti be painted over, storage bins removed, and restriping of the parking done. We also needed more status on the environmental cleanup, but I think that they did say in their papers that that's completed and they'll take out the cleanup materials. We also asked that for the TPPN 1099 calculations, which they provided kind of during the hearing, but that for a convenience store, that needs to go on the plans that are part of our plan set. Yeah, so the calculations and overall dimensions also on the plans need to be provided so that you can actually verify sort of the claim made in that earlier submission. I do think when I tried to verify it, it checks out, but we need to see that. I'm also assuming that the revised plans are being submitted for us to review, so what we got, and that the work will be done and photos of the completed work provided to us. The drawings, I thought in PDF form were really hard to read, especially the shrubbery. They just sort of disappear on the drawings, so that needs to be resubmitted using, we see this a lot where I think they scan the drawings and then they're illegible. You have to turn the CAD document into a PDF, then it's very clear.
Well, these were the September 21st was hand delivered. It wasn't emailed, so I scanned it into.
Yeah, no, but when it gets scanned, then it drops out everything. So based on kind of the ghost images, it seemed that the shrubbery wasn't continuing all along the shared property line, which it should be continuous along East 65th Street and the shared property line. There's actually no planting at all, not even a ghost of it, shown along the southeast shared property line that's adjacent to the residential neighbor. When I looked at 2017 Google Earth imagery, so it's a recent image, right? It showed that whole area is filled with junk. It's not to be junk storage, so that has to be cleaned out also. And then I noted there's floodlighting that is shown on the corners. Well, what's the purpose of the floodlighting that's right up against the residential property where there's that junk area? You don't need to light your junk, so. So that should be moved away from the residential property line and then, of course, shielded properly. Other comments?
No, I think you picked up on that.
Yeah, he's going to come and ask for more time to do the work.
Okay.
I spoke to him, I emailed.
Okay.
Item number 2, 37471BZ, 20511 Northern Boulevard, Queens.
So nothing at all was submitted on this. And at the last, did anybody find anything in the folder?
No.
Okay. At the last hearing, we stated that no further adjournments would be permitted and that the applicant must submit and appear at this hearing This has been in hearing since May of last year with 5 adjournments, so I think we should either, if there's no appearance tomorrow, I think we should vote to dismiss for failure to prosecute. And that's pretty serious, because what that will do is terminate the variance for the use. So I don't really know what's going on, but somebody needs to be paying attention to this application.
Item number 3, 490, I'm sorry, may I go on?
I just have a question about that, because you never can tell what the relationship is of the consultant to the property owner, right? So if, for example, the consultant isn't being paid, so isn't doing anything, the property owner may not realize what kind of exposure they have, right? We actually learned that in one case where the property owner never came to any of the hearings, didn't realize what we were saying about the application, and then comes to a hearing number 10 or something, and then realizes that if he'd been advised from the beginning, he would have acted differently.
On Canal Street.
Right? So I think this owner should be, to the extent we can notify the owner directly, should be notified, because
Okay.
we're, potentially going to dismiss this. And
Well,
it's
let me-
only the
let's look-
owner suffers, not the consultant.
All right, we'll check and see if something came in, it wasn't just uploaded or something, and then we'll also,
Okay.
we'll reach out.
So if anything, maybe close it tomorrow.
Loud, yeah, speak up.
Perhaps this could be closed tomorrow with enough time for us to maybe do some sort of notification to the property.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'll make it. Okay.
Item number 3,
Yeah,
4
just let me make a note about, that we're just going to close as opposed to vote. So,
Okay.
close and. Okay,
Ready?
yeah.
Okay. Item number 3, 4-98BZ, 12704 Guy Brewer Boulevard, Queens.
Okay. I know the intention was that this was to be a comprehensive submission, and maybe it's possible to get it comprehensive by tomorrow. But there was a landscaping plan shown, but it just shows a bunch of shapes that shapes signifying nothing in the end, because we don't know what they signify. So it needs to show the number, types, and spacing of the planting. And the purpose of that is so that in future, the planting can be maintained and future boards can know what was expected to be installed there. Photos do show the planting in place, but they're not key to the plan, so it's really hard to figure out what the scope of the photos are. They're like close-ups of a bush. So you know there's a bush, but you're not really sure where. And I also don't think they show the open area on the 128th Avenue side or in front of the trash enclosure, which actually is the kind of thing you would want to screen the most, right? So, the signage calculations show the non-illuminated signs in compliance with C1 regulations, but the illuminated sign is almost 3 times what's allowed for C1, C2 regs. So I think a piece of that sign has to come down. There's 2 parts to it that make it so big. Maybe the bottom part has to be removed or not be illuminated, something like that. Or they maybe have to be more precise about what's an illuminated versus a non-illuminated sign. It could just be they're too lax about how they're doing the calculations, and it does comply.
Okay,
Anybody else?
no.
No?
Item number 4, 16898BZ, 3050 Bailey Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, they requested an adjournment, not really understanding what the delay in prosecuting this is. We have been at this for a year, so this again will be the last adjournment. Failure to submit, failure to appear at the next hearing, we will dismiss for failure to prosecute.
Should this be closed?
Well, I don't know if it could be closed tomorrow because I don't know what I need to check what the open issues are. You usually close it when you have no further issues. So I would say we would close it, let's see, well, we can work that out, but in other words, the owner, I think the owner should be notified, same reason.
Okay.
So notify the owner. Okay.
Item number 5, 23501BZ, 2009 Mermaid Avenue, Brooklyn.
There you go. So I personally was a little confused by this submission. I see they submitted a Department of Buildings Alteration Type 1 submission that was just disapproved in September. So that just means they've just started the review process with it, which was to subdivide the tax lot or the zoning lot to remove that little piece, but of land that they're not really using on the subject use. We don't actually know that's what they did. That's just what we think they did because they didn't give us drawings that support that DOB submission. We also need to see, which we talked about at the last hearing, a zoning analysis that shows now that once subdivided, it would, both parcels would comply with zoning. Or is this just a tax lot subdivision, in which case, what do we do about that in terms of our review? Because normally we review by zoning lot, right? So a zoning lot subdivision means that both lots have to comply with zoning. The no signage calculations were provided, though we asked for those at the last hearing. And the cover letter states that the street trees were replaced, but they didn't provide photos of the street trees, right? So, and also for the landscaping along the building perimeter, they didn't provide photos, so we have no way of knowing. Any other?
They were also supposed to address the issue of the accessory storage area that was supposed to be landscaped, but that they paved over and are just storing stuff on. And they
Right.
didn't even mention it.
That's the tax lot, or that's the lot they're proposing to subdivide, right?
I don't know, it might be.
Yeah, it might be, that little that little
Right,
line
it's
on the
to
side.
the side of the
Right.
building.
That's the
Yeah.
one that they're proposing to subdivide.
Right, but while it's still under the jurisdiction of the
Right.
board, they have to address
clean it
the
up.
issues.
Yes,
Clean it
right.
up, yeah.
Good point, yeah. Because I'm not 100% sure they will be able to subdivide that
Right.
little lot out, because maybe it's substandard or
Right.
can't, if you can't build on it, you can't be creating a variance application. So,
And it includes the building, right, the residential?
I don't actually
No,
know. I
no.
don't think so. I
It's
think it's
just
just
that
that
little
little
vacant
skinny
piece of
thing.
lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which
that
might
could
be
a problem.
substandard,
Yeah.
so. Okay.
Ready? Item number 6, 18202BZ, 2990 Victory Boulevard, Staten Island.
Okay. This one, photos were provided to show landscaping and corrected fencing in place that's consistent with the proposed plans at the corner of Victory and Richmond and adjacent to the parking spaces number 5 and 6, and photos of trees behind the building along the property line were provided and those were photos that were provided in March, the ones along the property line. So I think we're finished with this, and the site looks much better.
Yes.
Okay.
Item number 7, 4610BZ, 140, sorry,
Sorry?
No, sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Item number 7, 4610BZ, 1401 Sheepshead Bay Road, Brooklyn.
Okay, they requested a 3-month extension to allow more analysis with the Department of Buildings and may withdraw the application, so always happy to encourage people not continue, where it means that it'll be an easier project for them and not have to be married to the BSA forever.
New cases, item number 8, 9708BZ, 84 Sanford Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, our general counsel has requested that we consider calendaring this item for a compliance hearing for the applicant's failure to submit required subslab depressurization system monitoring reports. I understand that the applicant has been generally unresponsive to our and the Office of Environmental Remediation's request. I'm just going to review a couple of things, though, that are in addition to that consideration. So the 2010 BSA resolution states that an SSDS has been installed, and it stated that it was installed just prior to the decision to, and it was to address indoor contamination due to elevated VOC levels, and DEP determined based on indoor air sampling that with the SSDS in place, air quality was acceptable. So it's only acceptable when the SSDS is functioning, right? Conditions of that grant were also installation of 35 dBA window wall, noise attenuation, and mechanical ventilation. In the 2016 resolution that we heard to extend the time to obtain a C of O, the board reviewed the noise and air quality issues and approved the extension on condition, among other things, that the applicant shall regularly monitor its SSDS system and provide the board with monitoring reports every 6 months. Also about trash pickup and trash being installed inside the premises, that a C of O be issued by March 8th of 2018, and that all current DOB and ECB violations be cured. So I went online and I note there's only one open DOB violation for an elevator inspection. That's a very common kind of violation. There are no longer any open ECB violations, and a final C of O actually was obtained in March of this year, which is a year ahead of what was allocated. And so it seems to me they made really significant progress given where we were when we started back in 2016. So on the one hand, we really do need to make sure the SSDS is always functioning, and it wasn't when we started that hearing in 2016, but they have complied with the other terms, it seems, of the grant. Opinions about?
Well, as I was reading through the questions OER had raised in its review, it wasn't clear to me whether these were questions related to the lack of technical information, or it was just the way the document was presented and the formatting of it. So it's the information, the content that was needed to complete the review or assess the issue, or is it more of formatting or other structural things? So to me, that was not clear from OER's review. And
Yeah.
It was, well, this is not something we traditionally do, so we asked for their input, and it was based on how the SSDS reports they require for their process. So they were more recommendations, not like fatal flaws in the report.
Okay.
And that's why we requested that next time they give the report, there's more information.
okay.
Okay, so but that was requesting for the next report, please give more information, but then they never submitted the next report. That's the issue, so that they haven't been following up. And the reason that we had this as a condition was because when we came to the application in 2016 for extension of time, we learned that the SSDS had not been operating since we didn't even know when, right? So that's why very concerned that these high VOC levels are sickening the children. We imposed this unusual condition and working with OER to help us with it, because that's not something we have really the staff to support. Okay. So are you okay with having this?
I'm in agreement with you,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. So this hearing is really just to calendar a compliance hearing.
Ready?
Yeah.
Item number 9, 21803BZ, 19-73 38th Street, Queens.
Okay. Sorry. So on this, it's a new case, so we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board 1 recommended a conditional approval of the application, but I'm not sure if I understand what those conditions are. The board indicated, I think, that there are parking issues in this car-centered Astoria neighborhood, and that perhaps the residents should have a voice in the proposal. I actually didn't really understand what they were getting at. Did anybody else? Community board comment?
Oh, it just seems like they want to possibly reverse this in the future should people complain about not having parking on the street because these affordable housing residents are starting to park on the street because there's a reduction in parking is what it seemed to me, but I don't know how you would even begin to
Yeah.
monitor that.
Exactly.
So it's problematic.
Yeah, either it is or it isn't.
Right.
Okay. So,
And oftentimes, it's very difficult, like you said, the monitoring part is going to be extremely difficult. It's not just that building, there could be so many other changes to the
Right.
values that could cause those.
okay. So Councilmember Constantinides recommended approval, citing costs of the stackers to this affordable housing project, which is certainly an understandable concern. And also that for the this is a note to our council, because one of the things that's being done here is some correction on the amount of floor area based compared to the original approval. It's a reduction in the distribution of floor areas. So I just want to note that the resolution should pick that up. So revised totals of commercial floor area is 19,632 square feet, and community facility of 2,517 square feet, which is just slightly different than what was approved previously, but less than. In its initial resolution, the board appeared to be concerned that the amount of parking spaces proposed at that time might be actually excessive. So, and observed that in accepting it, that there's a need for parking. So, so allowed it. So I think actually that board would have not objected to fewer parking spaces. And then I think it's reasonable to be guided by parking regulations for income restricted units as they are today, and income restricted and affordable. So I think that's a reasonable way to calculate. And so they selected the R5D calculations, but if you went to the R5, which is also another right adjacent, that would only require 3 more parking spaces than the R5D does, which is still less than what's being proposed. So I think it's reasonable.
So to me, the only potential hiccup on the horizon is way, way far down the line when their regulatory agreement with HPD discontinues, which is in 30 years, which could, at that point, allow them to become market.
Right.
And then the parking calculation might have to be revised or recalculated. So is there a way to put that condition into the
Yes.
resolution that barring a change in the, I don't know, the status of those income
Yes.
restricted units, they may have to come back to the board for a reevaluation?
Yes. And we've done that in a couple of other applications where we restrict the reduction, which is what happens with the parking reductions for community facility and
Right.
offices. As soon as your C of O changes, you better go find parking, right?
Right.
And the difference here is that I don't know that the C of O changes when there's a change in the affordability. So as a result, that needs to be in. We don't need to have that condition in our resolutions for community facility
Right.
and office, because DOB will instantly pick it up. But in this case, we should have a restriction. Okay. So it's for the life of the described.
Regulatory
Yeah,
agreement?
the life of the regulatory agreement, or it could also be the life of the income mix that's shown in this application. Because if they just renew the regulatory agreement, we don't need to see it again,
Right.
right? So the life of the described income mix. Or maybe we could say, and the regulatory
I would say regulatory agreement, because income mix can vary, and we don't need to get into that detail. So
Okay.
it might be better to just
Well,
say.
but you do, because income restricted is valued at 1%, and affordability is, general affordability is another percentage for parking, right? So, like the
Right.
calculation, it's 30, whatever it is, 35%?
Right.
So something about if the type of restriction changes?
Yeah. Life of the, that's why the type of restriction, regulatory, okay, we can work out the,
Yeah.
but we know what the idea is, okay. Okay. Okay.
Appeals calendar, decision items, item number 10, 16612A, and item number 11, 10713A, both are for 638 East 11th Street, Manhattan.
Okay. The owner made several submissions since our last hearing in June to argue against the board's reliance on matter of 9th and 10th Street to conclude that the use of the back building in compliance with zoning is impracticable. The owner cites to D'Amelia, the case D'Amelia, to argue that the mere possibility of illegal use is insufficient for the board to conclude that the space will not be put to legal use and never was intended to be. But in this case, the board has a record of 9 years to show, at least 9 years, might have been longer, but at least 9 years to show that the space was in fact put to illegal use, and that in spite of DOB directions to cure dating back to 2008 and BSA direction to cure dating back to 2013, the owner failed to remove the illegal occupancy until the late summer of this year, 2017. Based on these facts, it would not be unreasonable for the board to conclude that such illegal use will continue given the opportunity to do so. In its most recent submission, the owner resurrects the argument that the project was a major development and that there were on-site existing foundations for the first building, hence there was statutory vesting. DOB opined on that issue a very long time ago, and I don't disagree with their take on whether that's a major or minor development. I still see it as a minor development, a single building. And just a note, the owner has had 4 years before this board to make its case and correct the conditions. It has not been operating with clean hands to be in a position to claim that it has been treated poorly by DOB. We cannot keep this matter on the calendar any longer while the owner continues to burden the board and the board's calendar with possible solutions to a problem it was confronted with nearly a decade ago. So the only way to deal with this is just we vote this out tomorrow, and however it decides. Okay?
Item number 12, 23215A, 840 West End Avenue, Manhattan.
An adjournment was requested.
Item number,
Sorry,
I
do we know the
think-
reason for
yeah,
this
there was a-
adjournment?
excuse me?
There was a death,
Oh,
actually.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Right?
A what?
A death related to this case, no? No?
This one?
Oh, no, sorry, this is the one that's waiting for LPC.
LPC and.
Oh, this is for the-
Yeah.
okay.
Sorry, we skipped.
Thank you, thank you.
I get them confused which one.
Yeah, there's another one.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're still waiting for LPC sign off, and we have not received the report from
Right.
the co-complaint. Item, continued hearings, item number 13, 2016, 4263A, 235 Industrial Loop, Staten Island.
Okay. We have clarification on the maintenance easement that applies to the subject lot. I thought that was actually a really good submission. It really clarified what's what. And a note on the drawing was added that the building is fully sprinklered, so I don't think we had any other issue.
I thought this was very helpful to get, we often get pieces of industrial loop. This was very informative in terms of laying out the ownership and the complete picture. So I don't know if there's any way for us to keep record of these in future when these projects come, that we can.
Yeah, that would be great if we could yet another thing for us to figure out how to do. It's actually the borough president's job, you know? But it's, you know, that, but, and we're trying to help them, but, and we give
Maybe we
them
can
all
share this
the, we
information
give
with
them
them.
all the information about these sites. So to the extent that they have actually, their land use division could be compiling these, assembling the information. That's kind of the reason, one of the reasons that we're doing this, right? Is to get all of the deeds, all the easements, all
Right.
these maps, and then at least there's a cohesive understanding. Yeah. But I don't think have the archival capacity to organize Staten Island's road system.
Maybe put it on share or something.
Yeah, we can share it.
Share it on that. New cases, item number 14, 205-15A through 214-15A. This is 12860 to 12876 Cook Creek Boulevard and 12863 to 12875 Fortune Way, Queens.
Okay, it's a new application, so we have proof of service of the initial application and notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommended approval. The Department of Transportation comment dated June 29th requires the hydrant be located 7 feet from the curb cut. I don't think the plans are showing any dimensions. We still need fire department comments, but normally sprinklers are required for houses on unmapped or narrow streets. I didn't see DOT sign off on the corrected configuration of the Fortune Way turnaround. I know that they responded, but I don't know, I know the applicant responded to the initial comment, but I don't know that DOT signed off on it.
I believe they're okay, and that was, the latest one was their only comments on it.
So yeah, they didn't have any specific comment, they just talked about the hydrant. Does that mean they're done with the subject of the turnaround?
But I
Okay,
can double check that.
okay.
I haven't seen this.
Okay, and then I just wanted to check how many houses are actually involved in this project in its entirety. 3 houses are shown on the plans as being filed separately, so I don't understand why they're being filed separately. They also need to provide a borough president's topographical map, a builder's paving plan. There's no reason to be waiting to prepare that. Because we need to see that the roadways and sidewalks and lighting and so on meet DOT requirements. They need to provide a homeowners association agreement that covers development and maintenance of the privately owned streets. They need to provide a zoning analysis on the drawings. The subdivision, the way that I'm looking at it, looks like it's being used to avoid proper 30-foot rear yards between front and rear of houses. So one house sometimes gets even like less than a 20-foot rear yard. And I'd like to understand how the various portions of the zoning lot are being characterized with respect to interior, through, and corner lot. Because what are they calling, what's it called, Fortune Way? Is that being treated as a street? And if so, those are through lots and they have to provide rear yard. And then we have DEP sign-off conditioned on this description in its October letter, and those conditions should be clearly described on the plan. Those are my comments. Any others? I just find how they subdivide, how they lay the buildings on the zoning lot really problematic, and we had another case, because it avoids complying with distance between buildings and so on, you know? So, or not even distance between buildings, if each one was treated as a separate zoning lot, you'd have proper rear yards, proper front yards, proper side yards, and this way, it avoids all that, and I think that's actually does a disservice to the community, so. And I know we've had this conversation, this is in Queens, but we've had that conversation in Staten Island and how disturbing it is that these developments sort of take advantage of those kinds of zoning, say, errors or overlooks. Okay.
Item number 15, 2017-189A, 222 Duncan Hills Avenue, Staten Island.
Okay, again, a new hearing. We have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. They need to show compliance with the setbacks to the zoning lot lines. DOT states that Joyce Street is not in its capital improvement program. And DEP on June 28th signed off on the proposal based on the described assumptions, which also should be shown on the plans. Those were my only comments with that. Okay.
Anybody else?
Mhm.
Zoning calendars, item number 16, decision items, item number 16, 3014 BZ, 6101 16th Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay.
We received the air quality sign off and the final EAS was submitted digitally yesterday. We expect it today, so. I think
Okay. It will be submitted today. So we don't have,
We have the digital, we do,
Oh.
and the paper should come today.
so, but that final submission then is, we're good to go
Yeah,
with?
I
Okay,
reviewed.
so it's not like, so you've already reviewed it, okay. So, and I just, let's see. So I want to verify that all the DEP requirements, which included a vapor barrier and sound attenuation and whatever else they are, that appears on our conditions in the resolution and also on the plan somehow, so that it's clear that, I'm most concerned about things like the vapor barriers and sound attenuation that don't end up getting installed, right? So if they need to show on the plans. And also, way back when we actually discussed the substance of this case, we were concerned about buses. So we talked about buses to be parked during off hours at 1454 62nd Street, but that the bus drop-off and pickup needs to be done according to the operational plan that they gave us. That this specifically is approval for a K-12 school, not a seminary, very specifically. So that needs to be part of the condition. Okay. Did anything else that we go on for pages with this application.
Yeah.
So. Okay.
Item number 17, 205 14 BZ, 100-02 Rockaway Boulevard, Queens.
Okay. They provided the plans that we asked them to provide to clarify the access and all that stuff.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Continued hearing items, item number 18, 17215 BZ, 146-45 22nd Avenue, Queens.
Okay, at the last hearing, we discussed the minimum reasonable width of a building in this area based on the studies provided, and I believe we concluded that 16-foot wide homes are common in the area, which would mean that only a 1-foot reduction of the front yard depth to 9 feet would be required to afford relief, and now they're taking 6 inches off the other side, so it would be an 8.5-foot reduction. The revised drawings show a 7-foot front yard and a 6-inch side yard and a 17-foot 6-wide building. So that's something to discuss about whether they've made effectively the A finding, right? Is this something that really does need the waiver? We also directed the applicant to pursue a 1-family home, but now the units technically comply with the minimum standard. So I didn't realize that it's a strangely worded section in the zoning resolution that essentially tells you can have a 925 square foot and a 300 square foot apartment. I'm not wondering whether they really meant that. The proposal, now by pulling away the 6 inches and creating a so-called detached house that now qualifies for the garage floor area allowance. For me, it's really, have they made the A finding to begin with? And is there an issue with a 7-foot front yard being uncharacteristic of the neighborhood?
I think in this neighborhood, especially with corner lots, the front yard width on one of the streets has at least been less, because most of these buildings were built pre-61 zoning, so they did not quite meet the front yard requirements on both frontages. And what the applicant is proposing seems to be within those confines, and it is actually more than what we have seen in some of the corner lots that's been indicated. And the recent Pluto data that they submitted, where they have shown how many homes, have the width, and I think they have made the argument in my case, and I think they have established the hardship, so I'm fine with this application.
So you're persuaded that a 15-foot as
Yes.
of right wouldn't be adequate?
Yeah.
I mean, I originally was concerned that the two-family home was what was driving the waivers, but then they eliminated the waiver for the unit size, which was helpful. And the lot study that they showed that for either single-family homes or two-family homes, that a lot, as of right lot, building width of 15 feet is really smaller than the range of acceptable or of observed building widths. And because of that, then I felt like, all right, fine, then this is okay. It falls on the lower end of the range for building widths, and so I think it's definitely not going to negatively affect the character of the neighborhood.
Okay, good. All right.
Yep. Item number 19, 2016-4215 BZ, 262 Exeter Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. Just observing from what we received, they provided long sections and elevations that are actually, and also the roof plan, that are incorrect in that they don't show the setback at the third floor rear, which is shown on the plans as being 4 feet. It also shows the first floor slab that is 6 feet above grade, continuing directly out into the rear yard. And so it's 6 feet above grade, and I just don't know whether that's a permitted obstruction in a rear yard, because terraces are, but I don't know if you can have such an elevated porch in a rear yard. They also need to provide a visual mitigation measure pursuant to section 6461, because a new street wall is being created, which is the threshold, and the height of the first floor is more than 5 feet above curb, so it needs at least one mitigation measure. But other than
That was a
that,
question I had
Yeah.
raised before.
you did, yes, and they didn't do it, and I think they didn't do it because they thought that they weren't
They were not
building a
required.
new
Okay.
building or something, but that's not actually what the text says. Anything else?
Item number 20, 2016-4259 BZ, 8033 Shore Road, Brooklyn.
The revised plans were actually supposed to show existing walls to be removed, new walls to be constructed, and existing walls to remain on the proposed drawings. Again, this is something where the PDF is a scan, so it's really impossible to see the hatching or anything. I just couldn't figure out what was, from that kind of key, what was new and what was proposed. The dimensions labeled existing or proposed actually don't reflect the reality, like when you're comparing the existing building to the new building and you look at those dimensions that say existing, it's not existing, that section of the wall is being removed, so that wasn't helpful. It appears actually that most of the north wall at the first floor is being retained, but the entire west wall, most of the south and east walls are being removed. Something similar is going on at the second floor, but again, without the plan clarity, that's really just guesswork. Sections still show all but the first floor joists being removed. This all goes to the threshold question raised at the first hearing: is this an existing building to be enlarged? We also requested proof that the existing undersized side yards are a legal non-compliant condition and we didn't receive that. The survey that was provided shows a 9'1" side yard with a bay window projecting into it that reduces the side yard at the bay window level to 4'6", but the proposed shows the second floor following the bay profile. So again, by not having existing and proposed walls, it's really hard to tell whether it's improperly further reducing that side yard. The plans also need to be corrected to match the survey. The survey shows it's a 4'6" side yard, not a 4'10" side yard, both of them. No matter what, you can't reduce the total side yard width to less than 13 feet. And so again, I don't think the building supposedly was reduced somewhat in height according to like a section, but the so-called attic ceiling height, which is supposedly reduced to 7'6". Nonetheless, the stair envelope continues to that level. There are large dormer windows at the attic leading to balconies and the stair envelope. And if this attic is not intended to be occupiable space, why do you need a mansard roof, which we all know in class, because it's actually a classic mansard, looks like what you might see in Paris. That's where people live. So, and usually with a view of the river. So, which would actually be the case here. So elevations and the rendering show the third floor mansard roof level at least as tall as, if not taller than the floor below. So the sections actually don't jibe with the other depictions of the project. And just a reminder, this is a 73-621 special permit. So if we could make a correction on the calendar, because it still says 622 and it shouldn't. This special permit cannot be a workaround the discontinuance of the 73-622, which was removed from Community Board 10. Any other comments?
I concur with you. I still remain concerned about the proposed height of the third floor, which is now going to be just an attic space for storage. And if it is going to be used for storage, I'm not sure why such amount of height is needed for that. That mansard roof we had talked about, it can start from the second floor and allow for that architectural embellishment that the homeowner and the architect is trying to seek, and be able to accommodate a very generous living accommodation on the first and the second floor with enough space for storage on the second. The photographs that were submitted with regards to the surrounding buildings and their building heights definitely this building would be rising above them. And I don't think that was that is something we have seen or done in any of these projects. So I'm still uncomfortable about the building massive.
Okay. Any other comments?
To me, it just seemed like there was some kind of
Eraser.
an issue between the second floor and the third floor that needs to be reconciled, because it seems if you just look at the third floor plan that there is no staircase and it's only accessed by a step ladder, but then, like you said, you see kind of like a stair bulkhead kind of extending up from the second floor.
Right.
So I don't know if it was just an error in that they wanted to respond to us on the third floor and just didn't think of severing the connections on the second floor, or whether it was like, let's see if this goes over and then we'll still access that third floor by a staircase, and 7'6" 7'8", who cares? You can still stand up, especially if you're short, you know?
Right.
So it's just trying to wonder what they were really doing.
Right. Well, and by the way, we mentioned very specifically the stair bulkhead at the last hearing, and the dormers at the last hearing, and the balcony at the last hearing. So, you know, doesn't take a, yeah. Okay.
Item number 21, 2016, 4270 BZ, 540 Fifth Avenue, Brooklyn.
Oops, sorry. Okay, just because we asked them to, because this is potentially a noisy use and it's legalization, the hearing was noticed by posting in the lobby, and, but like another notice that we saw like this, there was no advice given in the posting of where people could submit written testimony. So we don't have any comments in our file, but I guess if somebody is upset enough about this use, they'll come to the hearing, hopefully. They did provide drawings showing acoustical measures taken, and actually photos of the guys installing the acoustical measures, and they provided other documentation. And they provided photos and affidavits that the fire alarm and sprinkler systems were installed, and absent fire department review of it, affidavits have been acceptable, so. Anybody else on that? Okay.
Item number 22, 2016 4334BZ, 341 Nevin Street, Brooklyn.
Oops. We received updated information about the on-street parking supply and parking regulations on the study date and on a more recent date for the regulations, which I still think was at an analytical disadvantage because there's all this construction going on. So on the actual space counting day, there was construction taking place on 8 blocks in the immediate vicinity, so that's a lot of parking. So, and then on the regulation day, there were fewer construction absorbed blocks, but then they didn't do a count, so you can't tell what the impact was. I also note that in this study, I think is extremely conservative, given how tiny this building is, really, and was actually, even though the regulations required you to look at the full zoning floor area of a building when you do the calculation, if we look at the floors themselves and what's actually occupiable space and how many people would actually be sitting there, it seems to me that if you just use the occupiable space, that's non-simultaneous space, that you would get close to what's being provided. And so I actually don't think that there would be a greater demand than what's being provided. And then I just wanted to check, do we have finally a completed Landmarks Commission and waterfront review sign-off?
Not yet. For the hazmat, we got the E-designation.
It's in place, or it?
It is accepted.
It's
so it
accepted,
will
so
be in
that's good
place
enough.
the
Okay.
day of.
So we're still waiting for LPC and waterfront?
Yeah, we anticipate LPC today,
Okay.
and WRP sent some comments, which we sent to the applicant last week, so they're
Okay.
trying to revise the EAS for those comments.
Okay. Okay.
I had just an operational question. If you look at the plans, the valet booth is in the subcellar, and my question was, how will they know when someone comes? Is there a call button? Is there a camera system? That was one question. And then I just had a question about the plans. Is it okay that the mezzanine is not accessed by the elevator?
I saw
Yeah,
that.
because that's that thing, if the building is less than, I think it's 3 stories, and you have equivalent use on a lower floor, then you don't need the
And do you
elevator.
need to still have an ADA accessible bathroom on that floor then? If you have no way of disabled people getting
That I
there?
don't remember, because disability is all different
it could be
things, not
different
just the
times.
staircase. And also, for instance, with duplex apartments, as long as you can get to the bottom and the treads are the right type of treads to get to the second level, it's okay.
Oh.
So I don't know if that applies in a commercial district, but we can ask them to verify. So verify. Okay.
Item number 23, 2017-24BZ, 1400 Bay Street, also known as Five Finger Board Road, Staten Island.
Okay. The drawings were revised to show in-ground planting along the perimeters. And what I can't remember, because I know there was a point where we were instructing the applicants to talk to us about planting, and the way that they responded was to say that the Board of Standards and Appeals will specify the planting. We don't specify the planting. But what we can do is provide a list of Parks Department approved planting, which we now have. And they actually have to hire a landscape architect, and this is an organization that can certainly, has the wherewithal to do that. We've been advised by the Parks Department that in this particular case, because the 4-foot wide planting areas are wide enough and long enough. The planting should be a mix of trees, medium height shrubs, and ground cover. And by the way, the planting bed has to be 4 feet of soil. For some reason, it got down to 3.6. It needs to be 4 feet of soil plus a curb. And in this case, we have plenty of room, so it's not like we're tight like we usually are. And then they said something about how they're not going to fix the slatting, but the slatting is unsightly, so they need to take it out if it's going to not be provided, because it can't be this haphazard, ragged slatting behind the shrubbery. And then the note on the plan really should be, it said something like fencing to be repaired as, what is it? I don't remember, repaired as appropriate or something like that. I thought that, what's that supposed to mean? So I think that's
Per field condition.
per field conditions, right. So it should be repaired or replaced as necessary to maintain the site in an aesthetically pleasing condition, or words to that effect. I'd like to come up with a good line that captures that concept. The idea is replace it when it's ragged, fix it when it's broken, you know. And then also they showed, it was kind of interesting, the submission, because it sort of gives to us the power to decide whether something is okay when you know while you're drawing it that it's not okay. So the lighting levels were provided, they went around with a light meter and revealed that it's like 13 lumens right at the corner of the property, and asked us if that's okay. No, it has to be 0 at the property edge, and you have to figure out how to get it there. So the shields need to be put in place, and the drawings need to show what the light levels will be, what the accomplished levels will be, falling to 0 at the property lines where people have houses. And then they had a request for 13 spaces and no dead vehicle storage, which I thought was reasonable on that gigantic site. And that was all. Anything else?
New cases, item number 1, 2016-4216 BZ, 1346 East 27th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, so for just a technical threshold issue, I didn't find in the file either proof of service of the initial application to officials or proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. However, usually what reveals that this was done, but we didn't get a copy of it, is we do have community board recommendation to approve, so obviously it was provided to them, and one letter of support from a neighbor. So please submit the proofs, because we're required by statute to have those proofs. With respect to the issue of the basement versus a cellar being treated as floor area, the adjacent houses seem to have similar issues, since they are all sitting on small slopes with steps up to the first floor, and we don't know that their floor area hasn't been calculated the same way as this one, including the basement as floor area. The requested floor area is much greater than we normally consider for these special permits in the 0.5 FAR zones. And I note also that on this next application that we have before us, in an R2, it sits on a steeply sloped site, and in that case, the base plane is being used to determine cellar level. I'm not sure whether that's actually allowed, but that's what they're doing. So it's being treated as a cellar from floor area purposes. Whether DOB accepts that, I don't know. This house, though, whether measured off of adjacent grade or curb level, is much, or above the front yard line, is much taller than its neighbors. The proposal is to add 1,284 square feet to the building, of which most is in the basement and first floor rear yard incursion. There's also an enclosure of the first floor porch, plus a second floor extension at the front that I find unfortunate from a design perspective, and which I note is already built pursuant to permits that were issued in 2015. And I just want to say about that, I personally find the applicant's approach to this special permit offensive, since it forces the board to accept the front yard encroachment, where it usually looks at neighborhood character and whether or not additional floor area that increases the mass or modifies the mass is in character or would alter the essential character of the neighborhood. I actually think that that front yard addition really does alter the neighborhood character. And especially the other houses on the block are either set back further from the front lot lines or have a one-story porch enclosure followed by a setback. So those would have been the kinds of conversations we would have had if the applicant hadn't just gone ahead and built this. So, and then, that confirms it was a porch, yeah. And I also would like to know how that addition was made in the first place, if the building is already overbuilt by almost twice the allowable FAR. So how'd they get an approval for that? Or is it a game of hollowed out spaces that was submitted to DOB? I just don't actually know how that was done. Applicant should provide floor area calculations to make clear what is being measured for the additional floor area, because my estimates show the cellar addition is 487 square feet. The first floor is about 450 square feet at the rear, and at the front about 240 square feet, plus another 240 square feet in the second floor. And that's closer to 1,400 square feet than it is the 1,200 that is being described. There's also a small increase in the size of the dormer, so the calculations need to be correct. And there's a section P9 that shows new joists at the third floor, which needs to be, I'd like them to explain. Any other comments on this?
I would like the applicant to provide the DOB-approved plan and also provide the floor area calculations for the second and the third floor. Because I think from the plan that was submitted, it seems, going to your question, and how was that second floor front was allowed? The way it was done, if I see as the plan in the proposed plan indicates that the third floor, the significant portion of the third floor was identified as a mechanical space. And that mechanical space was converted into a floor area on the second floor in the front. And now, as part of our proposal, that mechanical space is being reduced and some of it is going to become habitable space. So I definitely would like to see the DOB approved plan so that we have a clear understanding of the floor area calculations that were submitted there and how that progression from the existing to the DOB and the proposed is being carried forward. We need to understand that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other comment?
No.
Item number 2, 2016-4218BZ, 6679th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of service of the initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board 10 voted to deny this because it's out of context with the neighborhood character. This application is one of the few that the board continues to be able to consider because it was filed prior to the change in the zoning resolution that removed Community Board 10 from eligibility under 73-622 special permit. We have 2 letters in support and 1 in opposition from an adjoining neighbor concerned about the loss of light and air and the impact on his or her foundation wall, which I didn't really understand, but maybe that owner will come to the hearing. While in plan, the requested waivers are modest in that the adequate existing floor area and perimeter walls are being retained, no rear yard waiver is being requested, and side yard minimum total widths are being maintained. The third floor addition is 10 foot taller than the adjacent properties on a block with apparently uniform heights. Part of the problem is that this house, like its neighbors, is built on a high berm, so the impact of the additional floor is really exaggerated. The applicant must demonstrate that the proposal will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood, and specifically this social block, or it needs to modify the design accordingly, maybe by setting the addition back. I'm really not sure how to accomplish it. Also, I'd like to understand how, because I don't think it does, the additional height complies with the side yard setback requirements of section 23-632. It seems like it's penetrating those side yard requirements. In addition, the requested FAR increase to 0.85 FAR is actually high for the immediate area, where no houses on the social block and only 3 houses on the tax block reach that level. Photos of the few houses that exceed the FAR may be doing so because their cellar levels are being counted as basements, as they do not appear to be more massive than their neighbors. It is actually quite strange. You'll look at one house and it's 1 FAR and it's identical to the one next door and it's 0.5. Or it's 0.6. So how'd that happen, except that Pluto is getting different kinds of data as it does its sweep? Because also when you look at the Google Earth, you don't see that there's a rear yard enlargement or anything like that that would account for it. Anybody else? No?
Item number 3, 2016-4255 BZ, 4801 Ocean Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of service of the initial filing to officials and proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board 15 voted to approve with 25 in favor and 12 opposed. I'm not sure what the dispute was about. I kind of guess it has to do with the illegal work that often stimulates community boards to vote against projects. We do have 3 letters in support. This is a proposed legalization of front and rear additions that exceed rear yard, front floor area, and lot coverage requirements, and the new addition of 724 square feet at the 2nd and 3rd floors. As a threshold matter, the front and rear additions did not require the removal of the existing side perimeter walls and joists, so adequate floor area was retained to constitute an enlargement. I'd like to just check, though, whether this project was reviewed by the DOB floodplain administrator. The applicant says DOB reviewed it, but it's a very specific review that the flood administrator does, and so I'm concerned that a plan examiner might not be seeing the same thing as the flood administrator.
And also, they have to tell us how they're doing their calculations, because they should not be including the area that is to be legalized in the already existing building area when they're calculating the building value, because the building value should just be what is legal space. And then the to be legalized space needs to be included as the new space along with the other new space. And that may change the calculation. I don't know if it throws it, into now we've got substantial, construction. I don't know where that, line is and whether or not they cross it. But so they
Right.
at least need to address that and revise their figures.
Okay. Okay, so we'll send this to the floodplain administrator, but I not sure whether the project manager was aware to do that. I think he's out today, yeah. So with respect to the legalization of the rear yard reduction, it's an extremely modest 2-4-inch incursion at the first floor only. The 3rd floor enlargement is set back 11 feet from the street wall and approximately 18 feet back of the rear yard line. With respect to the height and permitted obstructions, I'm not understanding how the height of the 3rd floor addition complies with the roof thickness and exterior wall thickness exemptions, because the addition was not built in 2012. That only applies to pre-2012 buildings. So I don't think they get to take that deduction, or not take that as a permitted obstruction. It appears that the 3rd floor addition also is penetrating the required sloping planes from the maximum permitted perimeter wall height. The architect really needs to clarify why he or she believes the proposed is compliant, because I just don't see it. Anybody else? Okay.
Item number 4, 2016-4274BZ, 1411 39th Avenue, Brooklyn. Is that 39th Avenue or Street?
Say what?
It's Street?
39th Avenue versus Street?
I think it's
It's
street.
Street, yeah, 'cause-
Oh, it's Street?
yeah, because I live in Brooklyn, and that's not 39th
I've
Avenue.
been correcting all day long because I write street, and then I don't really know why it's all of a sudden called a street, but you know, okay. Right. So we do have proof of service of the initial filing to officials. I do not find proof of notice of hearing, although we did receive support letters. They really need to provide the proof of hearing immediately, even though conceptually they provided this notice of hearing, except that I note that the 5 letters of support from neighbors all come from the same realtor, who apparently owns several addresses. So that might have just been word of mouth or something, so I'm not sure. The community board recommends approval. This is a combined 73-19 special permit to allow zoning resolution section 1210 defined school in an M district, and also a variance to allow a rear yard waiver. As a threshold matter for the 7319 application, the applicant has provided a letter stating that they are a section 1210 school, meeting New York State education law requirements as set forth in the zoning resolution. 2 letters from real estate brokers describe the available sites in nearby districts where the proposed use is permitted as of right, and found these to be too small to meet programmatic requirements for 30,000 square feet. The site is within 400 feet of an R6, where it's permitted as of right. Because the site is actually connected to the sites on 50th and 51st Street, though, which are the subject of the next calendar, I actually think, and the programmatic needs analysis and the EAS and everything else are working in tandem. I actually think we should discuss these together, even though some issues will apply to 39th and some will apply to 50th Street. It's just that to discuss them separately makes it too difficult because it's the same programmatic needs
All right,
analysis.
so item number 5, 2016-4339BZ, 5018 14th Avenue, Brooklyn.
Right,
So
okay.
all together tomorrow.
Yeah, right, okay. So when you talk about it, you're going to have to be specific about what site you're talking about. And I didn't necessarily organize my comments by site, but I should have done.
I just
yeah.
have a question, though. Should we be talking about it by site? Because the programmatic needs is the programmatic needs for the entire facility,
Right.
including the existing buildings.
Right.
And I think that it's very confusing application because of that.
Yes.
So should we be separating it
Well,
out? Or
not
should we
really
also be talking
separating. What I
about
mean
it?
to say is sometimes I'll have a comment about the 50th Street building that has to do with like its height or how come it's
Oh.
built this way, and so that wouldn't apply to the 39th Street building, right? So that's kind of what I mean.
Oh.
So just be specific when you're making a comment about a building,
Mm.
which building you're talking about. But you're right about the programmatic needs analysis. You're like, well, wait a minute, if you have this there, then why do you need this there or something? Or why don't you have that there? With respect, again, to the 50th, 51st Street site, I'm just wondering why it should be analyzed as one giant zoning lot. And so, because it's got these 3 buildings on it, why don't you look at it as one zoning lot? And it actually might reduce we don't see the zoning analysis, might reduce the scope of the waivers, because it might bring the floor area down, because you have a larger zoning lot. With respect to the location, on a site visit in late July that I took at about 8:30 a.m. to both sites, with respect to 39th Street, I observed unaccompanied, very young schoolgirls walking to one of the several schools on the street in the middle of an active automotive zone while the sidewalks were being crossed with forklifts. It was actually a little bit of a terrifying experience. I mean, little girls walking by themselves and the forklifts coming on and off the sidewalk. And I don't know where the girls were coming from, whether they had just been dropped off at a street corner or whether they were actually walking some distance, but it was not an organized walk. It wasn't like an adult met them at the corner and walked them. And I found that really upsetting. And then also on the 50th Street location, there were all of these buses parked everywhere on both sides because that's like around the drop-off times. And I saw, again, girls running out into traffic between buses. So you actually couldn't see them until they were in front of your car. And there was nobody there making sure that the girls were properly crossing. There's no crossing location in the middle of the block, nothing.
It's a very dangerous area in general. When I drive through that neighborhood, I drive very slowly because it isn't even a question of children going to school. There are often unattended young children, like 5-year-olds who are watching 2-year-olds and then playing ball on the sidewalk. The ball rolls across the street. It's very hard to be a driver in that area. I just want to say it's not even just specific to that school. It's that entire
No,
area.
right. Yeah. No, not specific to this school necessarily, because they were continuing down to the school that was,
Right, I mean, not specific to
Yeah.
children walking to school. It's
Right.
just, it's a very densely populated area, and it is characterized by many young children being unattended in various facets of daily existence.
right. So
Yeah.
if you look at it from just kind of a general safety subject, it's both the children who would go to this school, but it's also the children of the neighborhood. When an institution comes into a place, I think they have to take responsibility for the neighborhood that they're in. And so if that means locating crossing guards who are there all day long, I think that's part of their responsibility. Otherwise, it doesn't matter which is the kid who becomes the really terrifyingly unfortunate victim, right? It could be any of the kids. So yeah, to that point, so that's a really big subject that needs to be addressed by this applicant and future applicants. There are a number of schools all over there, right? But this school on the 50th Street location has a large presence, so it's more responsible than the others. With respect to the total school enrollment in all the existing school buildings, the numbers in the statement of facts don't match internally and with the programmatic needs. So that needs to be reviewed. With respect to the programmatic needs analysis, there are many charts. I mean, I kept looking forward to a chart that was going to actually answer the questions at hand, but I actually never figured out how many classrooms per grade there are or where they are located in each building. The typical class schedule actually indicates the need for only 4 classrooms per grade, which is a total of 48 classrooms for 1st through 12th grade, not 149 classrooms as proposed. So what are all those classrooms for? In the nursery kindergarten at 39th Avenue, I believe this may fit the definition of child care services under Article 47 of the Health Code, since there is no elementary school in the same building. And that's the definition of when you're a child care service, when it's not affiliated with an elementary school, I believe, in the same building. In that event, there are fire safety and health code issues related to having small children above the 3rd floor or playing on the roof. There's also only one means of egress from the rear play yard. So the applicant needs to show that the project will comply with all city, state, and health and safety codes. And also, we have learned from other schools, because we've seen so many other schools with children of this age, that it's much better to have toilet rooms in each classroom for the small children rather than group toilets. So that has to do with the tiny kids, all of which seem to be in the 39th Avenue building.
But aren't they also
39th
having
Street.
kindergarten there?
Yeah, they said nursery kindergarten, but then again, how they title them and what the ages are has to do with whether they call this child care services or an elementary school. Because I think the issue is that when you have more older kids, they can assist in emergencies.
helping
when-
kids out.
Yeah,
of the
it's a
building.
lot of it has to do with fire egress. So you can have a fifth grader escorting little kids out, but you can't have a 6-year-old escorting little kids out, right? And so the child care services is defined as, I believe it's 6 years and under, or it might be 5 years and under. So I didn't make a copy of that rule there, but so they need to make sure that they aren't that, or if they are that, they have to comply with
With
all of
those
those
rules.
rules. Yeah,
Mhm.
which are quite strict in
Mhm.
terms of the level that the little kids can be on. Because little kids, that's the other thing, in a fire, a tiny kid walks down a staircase with enormous difficulty, and then you've got 100 tiny kids walking down the fire stairs,
Right.
right? Or maybe more than that. Also, the needs analysis doesn't explain what the need is, and this is getting to the crux of the big issue. What the need is at the 51st Street building for 12,000 square feet of lunchrooms in the subcellar, 6,000 square feet of lunchrooms in the cellar, 4,775 square feet of them in the first floor, and then, in addition to that, 2,000 square feet of multipurpose space in the cellar and 15,000 square feet of multipurpose space on the first floor. It also doesn't explain the need for 2 separate lobbies from 51st Street that lead into the 7,300 square foot, quote, multi-purpose room, which is equipped with 8 sinks. And also to 2 separate elevators that lead to what are clearly pre-party prep rooms for men and women, that are connected to separate lobbies that connect to the so-called 6,200 square foot lunchroom and the separate men's and women's public toilet rooms. And all of that especially because the existing building already has a lobby on 14th Avenue that leads to a 4,700 square foot lunchroom with men's and women's toilet rooms and connects to the 6,000 square foot lunchroom in the cellar and 2 lobbies from 50th Street that lead into a 7,700 square foot multipurpose room and connect to a 6,000 square foot multipurpose room in the cellar, subcellar. I note that the first floors of those existing buildings are described in the C of O as containing use group 3 banquet hall and use group 9 banquet hall, and a terrace Golda, which is entered from 50th Street, apparently has a thriving commercial catering business. The expansion of that use cannot be bundled with the expansion of a school for which this has educational deference. And all of this by way of saying that if you eliminate the double height multi-purpose room with party prep rooms, you can reduce the height of the building, the proposed building on 50th Street by approximately 20 feet and reduce the requested FAR increase by more than 1 FAR, according to the way the zoning law is configured right now. I still have a lot of questions, so I'm going to let everybody else talk, and then I'll come back to me so everybody else has their.
Well, as you mentioned, the programmatic need to me was not clear in terms of specifically what classrooms were going to be provided in which of the buildings. The 39th Street, I was just looking at the classroom sizes, I was guessing that's for nursery to K because the rooms, that's how the count was provided, but it was not clear. And that goes to the questions of what kind of after-school programs do nursery through K have versus from first grade to 12. And
What kind of what?
after-school programs.
After-school.
My question for that is, the applicant is proposing also a no standing zone from 7 to 7 p.m. on the
Yeah.
39th. It's a manufacturing area. There is active manufacturing uses going on. That's an extensive amount of time for no parking area to be provided in a fairly busy thoroughfare, and it's a two-way street with active manufacturing uses. So that is the reason why I'm asking, how long does the after-school program, is there an after-school program? How long does it last? And is that what's warranting the need for a 7 to 7 bus drop-off pickup in that area? The other question I had actually the numbers, floor area numbers were not consistent between the zoning chart, the plans, the statement of facts. Those need to be made consistent. They, with specific to the 51st Street, I had questions about why some of the program spaces, especially the below-grade program spaces, cannot be shared. The programmatic need is not clear at all as to why there was need for 3 separate lunchrooms, 3 separate multipurpose rooms in these buildings, and the data that has been provided, actually there's no data, but we need to understand why we need 3 separate multipurpose rooms and 3 separate lunch rooms, how these spaces being utilized, and why some of these cannot be shared, and that may reduce some of the bulk also. I also noticed in the proposed plan, every floor has a faculty room. We have not seen that. We see faculty room in one area or every third, or it's like combined. So why is that needed? Because you could replace that with a classroom and maybe reduce some of the bulk. Go ahead, I am reading through my notes, so if you're ready, you can
Yes,
start.
so I agree with both of you that there's a problem with the gross square footages and the floor area in both applications. It's not clear whether they're analyzing all of the current buildings or whether they're just analyzing the new building that's going to be on 39th and the 14th Avenue building. It's different per paragraph, basically, across both applications. I really personally think that since this really is a variance based on programmatic need, although there is a portion that's a special permit, I think in order to get an understanding of the programmatic need, we have to look at the entire program. So I think both applications should be analyzed within the framework of every building that's part of this school. So, in that case, there needs to be changes. When they're projecting out numbers for how many students are going to be in these buildings, they're projecting out to 2032, and we've never asked for projections going that far out. It's kind of ridiculous because you never can tell what's going to change in that amount of years. What is that, like 15 years ahead of time? And not only that, but if you look at what's just going to be in the buildings by 2021, there's an enormous amount of extra space. It's overkill. You're only going to have like 10 young people per classroom in 2021. So I don't think we should be necessarily allowing them to justify the space based on what's going to happen 15 years ahead of time, because in that case, then it kind of would throw the door open for all of these school cases to literally put skyscrapers on these lots. And in 2032, we're going to have 15,000 students. We don't know. 5 years is enough, and you should be building for 5 years, not 15. Same thing, I have the same comments applicable to the number of classrooms, because the number of classrooms changes. In one part, they want 149 classrooms, in the other application, 123 classrooms.
Yeah.
Some say there are 71 existing classrooms, and other ones say there are 99 existing classrooms, and it's hard to find out why. As for the character finding or the special permit finding about traffic, they need to give us more detail about the buses, the arrivals, the departure, how it's going to operate, the number of buses, where the buses are going to go, where the buses are parked overnight. Let's see. Just want to make sure I have everything. Oh, and then just a question about the refrigerated trash. Room of only 150 square feet to handle the trash from the possible catering operation that might be expanded, as well as the young people's lunches and breakfasts and snacks. I don't think 150 square feet is enough for all of the activity that's going on that 50th, 51st Street building complex.
Right, so they need to provide us, there's standard calculations that are provided that we get.
Right,
So-
And since it's only one room that I could find, looking at
Right.
the plans
There's
for
only
all of
one.
those buildings, then it needs to take into account
All
all of the
three,
trash from
right.
all of those buildings.
But it was also not clear how the trash was being collected from all of the spaces. That internal circulation between the three was not clear. That also needs to be clarified. Yes, and I agree with Commissioner Oakley Brown regarding the bus drop-off pickup. There was no information provided.
Right.
And we also don't know what grades will be using and how the grades will be distributed. As I was reading it, I thought the applicant wanted the flexibility of maybe there could be N through K in this new building, maybe there would be high school in the 39th, or maybe it could be combination, but it was just not clear.
Right,
And
but that's not a programmatic study,
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.
I mean, I think the reason that we ask for these programmatic needs analysis is you're supposed to actually hire specialists who know about school design, and the specialists advise the school how they should go about dealing with their future expansion, right? As opposed to, wandering around trying to figure it out. You're supposed to rely on the programmatic study to figure out what you're going to do in the future and why you're going to build it, because you don't build it with no idea about what's going into it. Then it's not based on programmatic needs, it's just based on building a lot of space, and eventually maybe we'll fill it.
And also going back to the 39th Street, it's, they lose so little by having to just expand, considered as of right, that I don't understand why they actually need a variance
Me neither,
for the rear yard incursion, when you do have a building that isn't that far away,
Right.
that could take that extra junior gym and the extra 2 classrooms. So I'm not quite understanding why the need is here, and to me, that's the inferior location, like Commissioner Shonda said, who really wants to put their children in an active industrial area. So I think that as much that could be in their little complex of buildings in an as-of-right district should be there.
But at the same time, if you're, for one, because somewhere in the materials, there's an implication that they would actually have 5-year-olds walking over to the auditorium on 50th Street, and that's a terrifying thought, because how in the world do you manage that, right? You're going to empty out the whole school to bring them over to an auditorium event on 10 blocks away, walking through this industrial traffic zone, terrible. So, at the same time, if you don't have the space on your campus that's adjacent, you want to divide the school naturally in some way. Either it's the high school students that go to that other building and they walk maybe the 10 blocks because high school kids are able.
I would argue that's a
Yeah.
better scenario,
Right,
because
yeah,
the high school
exactly.
students could take care of themselves in
Right.
an industrial area.
Right.
Yeah.
They need minimal supervision in terms of that. And actually, as I was reading it, I was hoping that somewhere in the document, it would be stated. It was not. Not that I want to see a school in a manufacturing district, but if you were to distribute, that's where one would not put kindergarten kids. The other thing was that with the 39th Street building, right now you don't have buildings on. It's a lot line building.
Right.
And the plans show that there are windows on the ground floor and on the second floor and the third floor, the classrooms that are on the side block.
Mm-hmm.
But these are not legal lot line windows.
Right.
So if those properties get built, very
That's it.
likely,
Right.
you're in classrooms, doesn't matter whether it's a nursery or high school, you're in classrooms without
Right.
any light and air. I'm not sure,
It's even a good location
good
for a
location
school.
for a school.
Because that's the other thing, is when we do see occasionally schools that are these mid-block schools that acknowledge their problem with the windows. And in one case we had not too long ago, they put a courtyard in the center and the classrooms face the courtyard, or they pull away and they have perimeter courtyards, so at the very least, there's some sort of light and air, but the response in the, the response in the materials that said, if a building comes, it'll just block the windows, that's not a response. So either they buy an easement from the neighbors they purchase the property, whatever, but it's not a viable solution to assume construction, and it certainly will be built because it's a 2 FAR zone, so absolutely those windows will be blocked. So, and it's just a question of when, could be really any time, it's a vacant lot, right? So, yeah, no, I agree. I have some other comments. So there's also a sidewalk vault on 51st Street that goes all the way around, and I don't understand the reason for building all the way out to the sidewalk vault everywhere, because it's eliminating street trees, and in this area where there's so much industrial use, you really do need trees to process the air, right? And then with respect to the Azurite, I didn't understand why there's a 20-foot setback at the second floor. They just need to explain that. And then this was a comment about the lot line windows. I'm going to try not to repeat what everybody else said. Oh, yeah, the programmatic needs description with respect to special purpose rooms. The programmatic needs study says that in keeping with the academic curricula, the school does not require certain specialized classroom spaces commonplace in a non-Hasidic school, such as STEM robotic labs, dedicated music, dance, and art rooms, shop fabrication rooms, or regulation-sized gyms. Many of these take place in the multi-purpose rooms. Meanwhile, there are 2 music rooms, 3 home ec rooms, a science lab, 4 computer rooms listed, so that's completely contradicting what they're saying. That they don't have robotics, I mean, that's, a detail, a lot of schools don't have robotics. With respect to the buses, in addition to what you were talking about with the 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., which is far too long for a no standing zone, when we visit those neighborhoods, one of the reasons that they're so dangerous is that they're absolutely filled with buses. And so the cars can't really drive through, and there's no place to park, and it's all really a nuisance that's created by these buses. They should only be there for pickup and drop off, and then they need to go away. So the school must find a place to put their buses so that it doesn't impact unfairly, really it's unfair, the rest of the neighborhood. And I think really the impact on the commercial use is really extreme. And we learned that from another one of our schools where we actually had testimony from a commercial user who said, I can't unload my trucks if there's these buses here, they have to come off, right? So also, also, the statement of facts says that the school buses operate at different hours than the neighboring school hours without giving any support for that, which makes no sense because schools start at the same time.
Right, and from what we have seen, there is another school at the corner.
Right.
And many of them have the same hours, so we would need that clarification.
I don't think it's an accurate statement. I just think they just
I
said
agree with
there
you,
might
but-
be a 5-minute difference or something, but unless, which is something we've been kind of advocating for here with all these schools, unless you hire one bus company that handles all the schools and they're all coordinated from that kind of walkie-talkie system, you're going to have chaos with each school handling their own buses, and you already see the chaos, right? We drive through it. The revised EAS and air quality analyses were submitted at the end of September. I assume DEP hasn't finished its review yet. DEP had many concerns about the prior submission, so I don't know what the response was. The EAS states that there won't be disturbance of the first floor slab. I don't understand how in the world that could be a true statement. You're adding 2 floors to a building, you have to drop down columns or other support. That would be a...
Yeah, I believe they are talking about there is no disturbance anticipated to the first floor slab and the epoxy coating. I believe the epoxy coating is kind of a very thin and fragile coating. If differential settlement happen because of the enlargement or increased loads, that could risk the integrity of the slab in addition to the coating itself.
Which
So-
kind of coating? What type?
Epoxy coating.
Epoxy.
Yeah. So I believe we need to get some more details on that statement.
I also wondered if the air quality analysis looked at the potential spray booth pollutants from the collision repair facility on the block? And did it consider rooftop play exposure? Because that's actually being proposed at both buildings, I believe. The plans should be amended to show the installation of a vapor barrier and a new concrete layer over the existing slab as, well, it says it was completed in the remedial closure report for 39th Avenue, so then that goes back to Commissioner Sheta's comment. If it's already completed, but then you're going to disturb it, then what was kind of the point of
There
having
was
done
a
that?
letter, did you see a letter of, we asked them to confirm there'd be no disturbance. Did you?
Right.
I'm not sure.
I
You
don't
might need
think,
more information.
well, if they confirm there's going to be no disturbance, then I'd love them to bring a structural engineer and explain to us how in the
Yep,
world they're
yep.
going to add 2 floors.
Yep. We can't take a statement like that without knowing the basis of such a statement.
Okay. And then there's also, the DEP had a lot of requirements that should be added to the 51st Street drawings that had to do with, what'd they say? About what happens as they're doing their excavation. It says, if encountered, soils displaying petroleum odor shall be disposed of in accordance with DEC regulations, covering the entire site with an engineered composite cover consisting of reinforced concrete footings varying thickness, da-da-da. There's a whole section in their letter. That information should be on the drawings. And then, as well as all of the other kinds of conditions that I don't want to read right now, but there's a lot of conditions that have to do with window wall attenuation, soil vapor and potential vapor encroachment mitigation, et cetera. That needs to be on the drawings. Anybody, any other?
I had a question on the massing.
Mhm.
So the proposed building is taking a building that's on the corner and, and a building that is attached to a row of 3 other homes. So the result,
Attached to 3 other homes?
3 other,
Building.
3 other buildings. I think there are
Yeah.
3 apartments, yes.
Okay.
That will result in a building that would be a lot line to lot line. So that means the school building will rise to the height, proposed height, all the way abutting this 3-story high residential building. I just want to know structurally how that is going to affect, or the precautions will be taken to secure that abutting, because it's an attached building, so they will be sharing the foundation wall, so
Really?
right?
There
This is an attached building, that attached building is going to be removed, and
Yeah.
replace that with the new building.
But it's not a party wall building, they're
I
just built adjacent, right?
That I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, this is like a row of attached buildings, 4 homes, 4 buildings,
Uh-huh,
and one of them is going to be removed.
okay.
So I just want to know the
Okay.
structural.
Commissioner Sheta can take
Yeah,
a
if
look
they
at
have,
that.
if they have
too.
a common wall and common footing, I believe it would be a problem to rip out one of the buildings and then rebuild it.
Okay.
But if they have 2 separate footings and 2 separate walls, the problem would be less, because it's gonna be some concerns regarding undermining the existing footing.
Right.
But it could be handled if this
It
is the
could be.
case. Yes,
Okay.
it's gonna be much easier to handle that.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We done?
Mm-hmm.
Item number 6, 2017-60 BZ, 111 Barrow Street, Manhattan.
Okay, okay. Just note that the application materials were revised in August, and the address for the application was revised to show 664 Greenwich, but the C of O is actually 111 Barrow. So maybe we should have the 111 Barrow, AKA 644 Greenwich, otherwise we won't be able to find it through the BIS program, right? We do have proof of notice of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval. As a threshold matter, this is also a 7319 special permit to allow a Section 12, zoning resolution, Section 1210 defined school to be located in an M district. The proposed use is a child care service. The applicant should show that the service will operate under a permit issued pursuant to Section 47.03 of the New York City Health Code, and that's how to show that it complies with 1210 definition of school. The applicant has looked at over 40 sites and was unable to find any that satisfied the criteria for minimum ground floor usable area. That was also not subject to high-end retail rates. That's actually such a big issue. If you need your daycare to be at grade in these neighborhoods, everything's these fancy Tribeca-esque or village, Greenwich Village stores, where they're $600 a square foot and things like that.
I actually just want to say, I thought it was such a thorough A finding for once. It was a pleasure. You know,
Yeah.
they identified their needs, they identified their sites, they talked about why they weren't appropriate. I was very
Yeah.
impressed.
That's great, yes. Good. Yeah, it's true, we don't get them so careful. Most of the time, they just kind of sort of throw it out.
Yeah.
A C2-6 zoning district where such use would be permitted as of right is across the street from the subject site. This special permit was created to ensure that both the commercial nature of the M district would not be disrupted by school use and that the children would not be endangered by the surrounding uses. Here, the building is residential, and the surrounding uses are more akin to a mixed-use commercial district than to a manufacturing district. So actually, I don't think we're dealing with any of those kind of issues here. So I only had a couple of questions. There's a buggy storage, otherwise known as strollers, buggies, because everyone's from England, I guess, who goes to the school. Buggy storage room near reception, and I just wondered if it's adequate really to hold 100 strollers, because in another application, we saw that they take up a lot of space. So is this assuming only foldable ones, or it seemed a little small? Also, they need to demonstrate that the room sizes are adequate to comply with health code regulations per number of children. There's a very specific area for each. I think they do, but they don't actually show the calculations anywhere. They should also show building code compliance with the distance from the remote area of the space to the egress point. The drawing note states that the building is fully sprinklered, but there's also, the two means of egress are not that far from each other and seem very far from the back corner, so they need to do that, show us that it meets the requirements. And then just a question if we have a DEP response on the EAF.
We got noise sign off and WRP sign off. We had asked the applicant for a project description that is more detailed in the construction activities for the hazmat. DEP needs that to continue their hazmat review.
Okay. Oh, in this case, I doubt there's any ground disturbance. It's just an interior renovation of an existing retail space. So, okay. Any other comments? Okay.
Item number 7, 2017-274A and 2017-275BC, 31 Boulevard Street, Brooklyn. This is a build-it-back project.
Right. So this existing build-it-back house is being lifted and shifted back 1.1 feet on its lot to accommodate an access stair in the front yard. This increases the degree of noncompliance at the rear yard, but reduces the degree of noncompliance at the shallow front yard. The existing house is non-compliant with respect to all the yards, lot coverage, and open space ratio, and the lifting of the house lifting and shifting of the house requires the need for this 6492 special permit. The access to this house is down a narrow pathway from Emmons Avenue, so it also needs a GCL 36 waiver. The house will be fully sprinklered, have hardwired smoke carbon monoxide detectors, will be fire rated at its underside 2 hours, and the maximum height to the windowsill from grade will be 32 feet. And is being asked to waive a number of its rules that are normally required for filing to facilitate the application. Okay?
This concludes the public review session for October 16th, 2017.